around some of the updates and changes that are going on with SSELA. And again, this is a very shallow dive, but please feel free to ask questions or to follow up with any of us after the session, and we'll share all of our contact information in the chat as well. So again, what we're undergoing right now is a K through 5 revision, and the K through 5 revision that SSELA is seeing is a 4-part revision, and the 4 parts of that revision deal with virtual instruction recommendations, equity considerations, virtual or digital literacy and content resources, which is what I managed that Donna was curating earlier on, and then materials to assist in virtual instruction. When SSELA was originally conceived nearly 20 years ago, it was designed to be a platform where teachers were going to be physically accessing resources and sharing them in the classroom space. You know, obviously over time, that's changed as we've seen things like flipped classrooms become more common and technology has been infused into our elementary classroom spaces. But certainly in light of the pandemic and the movement of our districts to hybrid models or virtual models has kind of accelerated the need to provide more of these resources. And so what we're going to show you is what these resources look like, where they're located, and how you can access them. So if you have K through 2 colleagues who attended our webinar earlier in the week, what we shared with them is that the majority of the revision work for K through 2 is already finished. So we rolled out in K through 2, for those of you that are familiar with the framework and those grade levels, you recognize that there's a lot of common touch points and a lot of overlap between those grades. So K through 2 have seen the majority of these resources already be uploaded. What we're doing for 3, 4, and 5 is we're doing a rolling rollout, not to be redundant, but a rolling rollout. And so what you'll see over the next several weeks is currently grade 3 unit 1 has most of their resources uploaded. We are going to be uploading grades 4 and grade 5 unit 1 virtual instruction recommendations in the coming days. But the majority of the equity considerations, digital literacy and content resources, and materials to assist in virtual instruction have already been uploaded. So again, this is going to be something that you're going to see kind of unpacked in the coming weeks, and we'll be creating these resources in real time. We also encourage you to do is that if you have a question, or if you are working in the curriculum and you have a recommendation or something specifically that you're looking for, we really do encourage you to reach out directly to us, and we can try to see if we can make that resource available to you or work with you to help you develop that resource. So just to give you a sense of the work that's going on here, I'm going to toggle back for 1 second before we actually jump into the platform and just show you a summary document that we're working off of. And this summary document just gives you an idea of some of the resources that are being added. Again, for K through 2, much of our revision has been around books on video and adding more current texts and also texts that reflect greater diversity. As we toggle down and scroll down, you'll have to excuse Google, it's a little slow this morning. But as we toggle down past grades 2 and we go to grades 3, 4, and 5, you'll see that there are additional activities. You'll see that we're also making corrections as we go through, because one of the things that we want to continue to do with SSELA is improve the platform itself. We've updated worksheets. We've added National Geographic activities. We've fixed and updated CRQs to reflect and make them truer to what students are going to be expected to do actually when they get to the secondary level. We've updated different definitions, and we've posted tons of new teacher reference materials in order to make them more friendly and more supportive of teaching in those different environments. So I'm going to jump back now to the website. And we're going to go to the login page. One of the things we wanted to do is we didn't want you to have to be searching for these resources. So we're going to show you in grade 3, unit 1, where the resources have already been populated. And again, for grades 4 and grades 5, you'll see these being unrolled in the coming days for unit 1 in both of those grades. And then going forward, it'll be on a rolling basis.
I didn't see, I think the hand wash, I was having trouble getting.
All right, let me see. I'm just going to mute everybody because it sounds like we have somebody who has themselves unmuted. There we go. So when you go to the landing page, for those of you that are longtime users of SSELA, you'll recognize this. You go to the sign in button. Those of you who maybe used SSELA Classic in the past will notice that it is no longer an option. We have completely and totally migrated over to the integrated or enhanced SSELA platform, which means that you can only access it by using your school district email address and then your password. When you go to sign in, the website itself looks basically the same from year to year. There may be some updates and changes this year, but we'll be keeping you all ahead of that curve and sharing that information out. One thing I did want to point out is that our online learning resources from last spring are still available. We have 3 through 5 mini units right here. One is on changing the world around us, understanding the synergy between governments and the environment. And we also have understanding my human rights, balancing our wants and needs during challenging times. Both of these are really designed around virtual or hybrid instruction. They are not meant to replace the full SSELA curriculum or the New York State framework, but they're designed to augment it. And these are available to you without even actually logging in. These are open source. So if you are a Google district, they are Google friendly already. They also are available in PDF version. And so please feel free to utilize those. We also down here have a curated list of texts exploring epidemics and pandemics. Those are more for grades 6 through 8, but if you do have students that are interested or are asking a lot of questions, there are texts that are in there, and there's also additional resources to help you speak to students about what's going on around us. We also have using news sources to enhance instruction K through 8. So as we get into the election season, this is going to be a great resource to utilize. We also are developing and will be releasing in October an election mini unit, which is going to have lots of curated resources to help you unpack the presidential election and local elections that are occurring across New York State. And then we also have a presentation down here from Linda Brandon, one of our other consultants, on creating engaging games and activities to use with the SSELA curriculum. And she's also offering a professional learning session in mid-October, and that's available on my learning plan, focusing on this same topic right here. So let's jump into grade 3. So you go up here. Remember, the grade levels are all accessible along the top of the screen. For those of you that use it regularly, you also saw that in late spring, we populated all of our introduction videos, which give you an overall sense of what the unit's going to be utilized. We often get questions about whether or not these can be used with students. Absolutely. You know, if we want to think about incorporating other voices in our instruction, you can certainly use Dr. Brown, who does a lot of the grade 3 ones, or myself, I did a lot of the grade 4 and 5, or April Francis, who's a former colleague who's also found in these videos. So these are for your own usage, but can also be used with students to give them a sense of what the overall unit is going to be about of study. When you go to the units, same exact setup, right? Everything is organized into lessons. And so we click on a lesson. Same layout with enduring understandings, essential questions, and suggested time periods. Where the actual lessons and directions live is in the same location under activities and procedures. Click to open. It's broken down by day. And what you'll notice, again, over the next several weeks, begin to populate throughout grades 3, 4, and 5 are virtual instruction recommendations when appropriate. You will not necessarily find them in every single lesson. And then you're going to also find equity considerations. They're going to be contained right in the actual lesson plans. And we did that purposely so that as you're reading through the directions and thinking about how you're going to turnkey this to students in either a hybrid or in a physical classroom, or virtual classroom, we also wanted you to just be able to take these things into account. The virtual instruction recommendations sometimes may be very general and make very general recommendations. In some cases, they may specifically say, you know, skip this step and go to this step, or combine these 2 days together, or use the C3 inquiry in place of this lesson because it's an easier way of turnkeying this in a virtual space. Our equity considerations are just general ideas to share. about how this may be interpreted or taken by diverse learners. So as we think about grades 3, 4, and 5, those curriculums which all touch on the aspects of culture and different groups of people, grade 3 looking at it globally, grade 4 looking at New York State history, and grade 5 really looking at the Western Hemisphere and doing a comparison of government and countries and culture. We just really want to make sure that we are elevating all different voices. And so again, the equity considerations are not formulaic. They're not a step-by-step process, but they're just a lens to help you think about what you're going to be presenting to students. Along with these equity considerations, and I can have Donna jump in a second, we are looking at always incorporating more diverse texts. We're looking at more diverse authors, and we're looking at elevating different voices. Don, I don't know if you want to speak at all about grades 3, 4, and 5, and just generally any of the work that you've done in 3, 4, or 5.
I think in 3, 4, and 5, the concentration was on trying to make sure that materials related to Native Americans and African American cultures and others were there. And so you may find, for example, in grade 5, where the Haidagawa documents are more robust, or you may find in grade 4 some documents that are related to the Onondaga Nation and the Haudenosaunee or the Shinnecock. Books were recommended as well. Some of those are classic things that have been around for a long time. Others are things that may inspire you to interact and do different kinds of activities with kids.
Thank you so much, Donna. And again, one of our focuses, and Donna alluded to this, was thinking about how students are going to see themselves in the different virtual space or hybrid space, and thinking about how, again, I know that social emotional learning is a buzzword right now, but that sense of developing community and that idea that because 3, 4, and 5 all are around the idea of culture, we're going to have to develop our cultures within our classrooms in new and diverse ways. And I want to thank Adam. Adam just shared in the Zoom group chat some just kind of general questions that are great in terms of focusing your lens in terms of diversity and cross-cultural competency. But as we think about what New York State is really focusing on, right, that idea that students need to be aware of different cultures, they need to respect other cultures, they need to celebrate that diversity, they need to recognize not only sameness but differences and elevate those differences as a source of strength. That's something that we've been very deliberate about. And so you will see that, again, it's not a overnight process, but you will see more diverse narratives being brought in. And going forward, one of the things that SSELA is going to look at when we incorporate new text and new resources is whose voices are being uplifted. Are we representing historically marginalized groups? And then the other thing that's really important, and this is even more of an ELA point, is when we think about how students are represented within our classroom libraries, are diverse students seeing themselves in texts and not just seeing themselves in historical moments where they had to overcome adversity? So when we think about the framework, right, the first time that a 4th grade African-American student sees themselves or sees people that look like them represented explicitly in the curriculum is in, the discussion of slavery in New York State. Now, in SSELA, we do an exploration of culture within Kenya. And so people do get a sense of the rich vibrancy of culture within Africa. But if you do not choose Kenya as one of your countries in 3rd grade, or your colleagues don't, in 4th grade, a student is going to see, right, themselves represented in slavery in New York State. And that's something that we do have to explore, but we want to make sure that we're also allowing students to see themselves in joyful experiences and not overcoming adversity. We also are trying to curate the resources so that we don't engage in tokenism. Black History Month, Latinx Month, Hispanic History Month, all of these different months are important to celebrate those cultures, but it can't just take place during those months. And it can't just be, outside the library, let's feature some text and let's, talk about Dr. King for a month. It really needs to be infused in the curriculum so that, one, diverse students see themselves, and that other students are also exposed to diversity, because we often fall into that trap. If my community isn't representative of a certain culture or doesn't have a certain demographic of people within it, then I maybe don't need to do the deep dive into it. But we know how critical it is for students to see differences in culture, so that when they do get out into the real world, when they move on to that next part of their life, they're seeing and they understand diversity and they value it. Nancy, is there anything you want to add in terms of just an overall takeaway from the virtual instruction recommendations? Nancy, you're muted.
There's a lot going on in the background here.
I bet.
The one thing I want to reiterate, we've touched on it now several times, particularly in grade 4. Just a reminder, the virtual instruction is going to remind you to not simply dwell in the past when looking at these groups, but to dabble a little bit in how these different cultural groups are existing and moving forward in American society and culture today. And that was a piece that we definitely felt was a little short in the lessons. The other is that I'm finding, particularly in grades 3, 4, and 5, is to try not to rely solely on the facts of geography, but also make sure you are asking students to apply geographic understandings to the world around them. So in other words, make sure there's some kind of critical thinking connection rather than simply locating places on a map and dealing with geographic placement. But think about how that placement affects people. And we've also talked about adding how technology affects people's environment. So that's it. That's what's coming in the virtual understandings.
Thanks so much, Nancy. And like we said, those will be uploaded in real time as we add them. We wanted to take great care here. And our goal, again, is to support you going forward and to have that support and recommendations before you get to that learning point. And so you should see that information populating for those units in the next couple days. The other thing that I'll also encourage you, myself and Donna and Nancy and Linda are also working on a grade 6 through 8 social justice mini unit. And while it's not necessarily going to be documents that elementary school students may be able to access without support, there is going to be some key ideas in there that you may want to just refer to or look at for your own thinking. And certainly if you're somebody who's feeling empowered and thinking, you know, in the wake of everything that's occurred in our country over the last few months, you know, issues of racism and systemic injustice are not new, but they certainly are elevated oftentimes. And, you know, after George Floyd's murder, you know, the reaction is we have to do something about this. Well, these issues have, you know, existed now for centuries. It's just that we are finding ourselves, you know, newly called to action. But certainly if you are somebody who is feeling empowered, if you're in a district which is giving support or wants you to really engage in social justice and engage in those conversations about equity and inequity and community issues and looking at how we can operationalize students to take action on issues, I'd really encourage you to go back to the 3 through 5 mini units that already exist in the platform, but then also look at the social justice mini unit, which should be coming out in the next 2 weeks, because one of the things that it will do, and it does it specifically at the 8th grade level, is it looks at historical civil rights movements and then it compares them to contemporary movements. And it talks about the people that are impacted by those movements, what's changed, what's the same, and it ultimately challenges students to think about what are the solutions to this problem, what's fair here. And our 6th grade component of the 6 through 8 mini unit really focuses on the idea of universal or human rights, which does tie in really well specifically to grades 3 and 5 as you look at cultures across different countries. One more thing to show all of you is where the resources will populate in real time. It's the second tab underneath the days. Again, down here, you're going to find your teacher materials, your internet resources, your student handouts. if Donna comes up with a particularly powerful text, video text, she would put it in here and it would come up as, a book resource or an electronic book resource. C3 inquiries, ladies and gentlemen, are going to be a great resource to push out and to challenge students to have critical thinking. Remember, a C3 inquiry can be adapted in many different ways. It can be broken up, it can be chunked out. One of the most powerful ways to unpack a C3 inquiry is to chunk the entire thing out and have the students do multiple tasks around it and to give actionable feedback, specifically using the practices that New York State has in place. But certainly you're going to find in a lot of the virtual recommendations that if there is an applicable C3 inquiry, that may be an option for students, because it does relate to so many of those practices of analysis, of contextualization, of understanding cause and effect, and then ultimately thinking about how geography ties in, right? Because we don't want to just memorize geography, as Nancy said, and Donna is also a big practitioner of. We want the application of geography. We want to understand how geography is influencing all of these things that are happening. And K1 and 2, right, they look at maps, but 3, 4, and 5 is the application of those geographical skills on a much deeper level. And to have students make sense of the world around them and to understand their place in the world at a time where they're feeling isolated is going to be a really powerful way of creating those connections. And so we really encourage you to do that. So that really sums up our kind of shallow dive into the SSELA revisions that have occurred over the last month and a half or so. I'm just going to open it up to Donna or Nancy if they do have any final thoughts. And then what we'll do is we'll open it up for any questions you have. And you can feel free to, again, write your questions or your thoughts right in the group chat, or you can certainly utilize the participants button and raise your hand, or since again we are a group of colleagues, you can just unmute yourself and feel free to pose or ask your questions. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Donna or Nancy, any final thoughts?
I think when you look at the materials that are there, the one thing that Greg has already said a number of different times is looking at perspective and whose perspective and whose voice, and comparing perspectives. And while third, fourth, and fifth graders may not have sophistication in that, certainly the introduction of those kinds of things and looking for those things is important. I think connectivity is important. How people are connected relies on geographic knowledge, whether it's networks of connectivity in social media today or other kinds of networks, roads from the past, etc. So looking at how people used the environment and how we have used the environment and how that affects others, including animals and plants and so on and so forth. So there's lots of opportunities here, I think, and your imagination and creativity are what will make it come alive for kids.
Thanks so much, Donna. Nancy, anything else to add?
Well, there's one thing I do want to say, and that is, as you look at the lessons, particularly in 3, 4, and 5, when we originally wrote these with face-to-face instruction in mind, there are many points where we rely on discuss this to bring out either higher order thinking or to check for understanding. I would just caution you to give some thought, and I know the classroom teachers are much more experienced in this, but give some thought to how you break students into groups, how you check to see that the greatest number of students in your classes actually are either participating in the discussion or are letting you know in some way that they have at least engaged in the thought processes of discussion. Because the one thing I fear is that questions are answered and then we move on without really engaging the greatest numbers. So give some thought as to how you can break students in breakout rooms or whatever platform you use in and out of moving away from the central screen that you're working on, letting them discuss and kind of popping in and checking for their understanding, or do an exit ticket, whatever. It's very important to make sure you have a thumb on what the entire class is getting from that discussion. That's it.
Thanks, Nancy. And one of the things to also just kind of keep in mind, and we often say this when we do work within districts, is, be forgiving of yourself as you engage in this work. I know that many districts, right, as we think about what schedules are going to look like, and as we, try to come up and prioritize, how much time social studies is going to get, when you really think about the landscape that we live in, and you think about the issues that are going on around us, there's really never been, at least in my 15 years of teaching, there's never been as critical of a time to engage in discussing social studies. And, we oftentimes don't give our elementary school students, the credit that they are so incredibly perceptive, and they're picking up on the social discourse, and they're picking up on the rhetoric that is becoming increasingly common, and the marginalization of certain groups of people. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that, and we have to make students feel safe to talk about and discuss those things. And again, being proactive, reaching out to parents, and again, a lot of it, has to do with your community and, where your community's at. But we really do have to push this learning forward. One other thing I am going to share with all of you in the chat, which may also be helpful as I was listening to Donna and Nancy's discussion, is thinking about how we go ahead and assess how students are doing. So what I just shared with all of you, and I'm going to open it and actually share my screen one more time. Just do a little add-on here. What I'm going to share with you right now is, and again, if Google will cooperate with us, can you all see? Can you see the rubric? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I'm working on 2 computer screens, and sometimes they don't cooperate. What you see here is something that myself and the consultants created. It's a crosswalk of the social studies practices. And so as we think about what we're going to be assessing students on, as we think about, maybe the idea that content and memorization, right, which is not something we ever really want to focus on, but certainly in a virtual space is even more challenging. As we think about ways to assess students, New York State in its 6 practices has broken down, and I'm going to see if it's going to let me increase the size of this, and it's not. Let me try to drag it over. But New York State has said that there are certain skill sets that all students need to have in general, and then in their application to social studies. This document that I shared with you could be used as a rubric to assess those different skills. So the first skill that they talk about is gathering, interpreting, and using evidence. Think about how often in both social studies and in ELA instruction, you have students gather information, you have them synthesize it or interpret it, right? The next gen ELA standards use one term. In social studies, we call it interpreting. I think next gen ELA standards say synthesizing. And then we ask them to use that evidence to make an argument or to make a claim. What you can do here, if you wanted to focus on that particular skill in a C3 inquiry or even in ELA, but you wanted to connect it to social studies, if you're a 4th grade teacher, this crosswalk that we developed that I shared with you, what you can do is you can use 4th grade as your benchmark, as hitting grade level and hitting expectations. You could have 3rd grade and you could change that to approaching, right, benchmark or expectations, and you could have 5th grade as exceeding expectations. So you can literally create a rubric from this document aligned directly to the social studies practices. And that is something that throughout the course of the year, whether you find yourself in in class, then hybrid, then virtual, then in class, then virtual, then hybrid, you can chart skill development continually in all of those different environments, and you can make that a focus of your practice. So this is just another great resource to have in your toolkit that we wanted to make available to you. But certainly if you have any questions about how to utilize this, feel free to reach out to myself. I'm going to pop my contact information right into the chat right now. But again, what we'll do right now is we'll open up the room to any kind of questions that anybody might have. And again, we're just very, very thankful to have you here today with us. And Donna and Nancy, feel free to share your contact information if you'd like as well. Also, I'm just going to share one other contact information. If you have any type of issues regarding technology, logging in, password issues, I'm going to also share Jessica's email as well. Jessica's the other half of PNW BOCES, SSELA team, and she's also always happy to help you. All right. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. What I will say is, we wish all of you the best of luck. We are excited that we are going to be offering these webinars on a monthly basis, and each listserv email that we send out will have further information about what the topics will be. The one other thing that we would ask all of you is that you please feel free to share any resources that you come across, anything you developed. Adam had shared quite a few resources in the chat, and thank you again for that, Adam. We greatly appreciate that. But also, if there's a particular topic you would like to see us cover in a webinar, please feel free to also reach out, and we would be happy to tackle some of those topics. But certainly, we are in uncharted territory. We have a question. Was this video? Yes, it's recorded. The recording should be up in the next 2 weeks or so. We just have to do some editing, and then we will share in the listserv where you can find the full recording. All right, so it looks like everybody's had all their questions answered. Nancy and Donna, thank you so much again for joining us this morning. For those of you that are third grade teachers, there is a webinar at 10 o'clock from Level Up Village, which is a terrific program that allows a classroom to connect with students in Kenya. But it is also applicable for grades 2, 4, and 5, but it's really designed for grade 3. So please feel free to join us for that webinar as well. And the link to that webinar can be found in the listserv email. We just wish you all good luck going into the new school year, and please feel free to talk to us again soon. We're not going to be sending videos to email addresses, but we will be sending it out in the listserv email, and then you'll be able to access it. It'll be available on the PNW BOCES YouTube page. All right, everybody have a wonderful day, and we look forward to talking and collaborating with you in a successful school year. Have a wonderful day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.